I'm Josh Harris, and you're listening to Clear and Loud, a podcast about the ideas, stories, and voices that are shaping our world. Hey, welcome back to the Clear and Loud podcast. Today I'm talking to a gentleman who is an expert in destination marketing, tourism marketing, and a really thoughtful, sharp dude. And you know the question that I want to ask him? I want to ask him, how did Nashville, Tennessee become Nashville, Tennessee? Because I just went on a trip to Nashville. Gosh, it's been a couple of weeks now. I've been there before, but it was the first time that I had the real, like, Lower Broadway, honky tonk highway, Nash Vegas experience. We had local friends who who took us through to all these bars, and we heard all this incredible music. And as I'm walking down this street, which is just completely packed, buzzing with energy, bachelorette parties all over the place, I just had the thought, like, how did they do such an amazing job creating this? I mean, why can't my city have a street like this? Anyway, I'm going to ask Conner that question in our interview, and I think you're really going to enjoy the way he thinks about digital marketing, digital experiences, and how that ties into and plays such a huge role in how people travel and experience tourism. Really insightful stuff in this conversation. Let me tell you a little bit about Conner. Conner Galway is president of Junction Consulting. It's a digital consultancy based here in Vancouver, BC. He founded Junction back in 2012 when he saw a need for organizations to expand their thinking about what's possible for digital value within organizations. Something he's working on, he has become one of Canada's premier digital educators, teaching and developing curriculum for universities, and also launching this all new platform, elearningu.com, which is North America's largest collection of online learning for the tourism industry. And so he just lives and breathes this stuff. It's going to be a fun conversation. It might even shift the way you think about your next trip. Listen and enjoy. Conner, great to have you on the podcast.
Appreciate it. It's good to be here.
So you are a digital marketing consultant, and I'm really curious about the particular interest that you've taken in the whole realm of tourism. What drew you to that? Why is that important to you?
Yeah, it's funny you asked that because I don't really think about that very often, except that, I mean, first of all, what's more fun than tourism, right? Like I love to travel.
Exactly.
I've been, doing as much of it as I possibly can. And now with work, I get to do a little bit more of it. But also, like, over the last 10 years or so, we've been running this consultancy, and we started with this general idea that this internet was going to be a big deal and that people should probably embrace it. And that was niche enough at the time. And we just kind of worked with really interesting people, had a bit of success, and followed where that went. And one of the areas has been definitively tourism. But like early on, I remember thinking, like, I don't know, it's tourism. Like, how big could it be? We're going to need to diversify. We're going to need to, like, keep our business in a variety of different places. But as I peeled back the onion, another layer and another layer, I realized that, like, this is a huge industry and it's super impactful, and it reaches into just about every other part of our like economy, of our society. And so it's fun, and it's much, much more impactful than I think I originally thought.
Do you find it more challenging to market tourism compared to other industries?
Yeah, it's tourism is its own unique way of thinking about business, for sure. And maybe I'll contrast it with retail, because we still do a lot of work in retail. Very often we just think about the point of purchase, right? So how do we take somebody from I've never heard of you to now I'm interested, take my credit card. Whereas tourism is a lot different in that one of the things we talk about a lot is you're never not a traveler, right? Like the moment you go on a trip, you have this amazing experience, you check out from wherever it is, and you get back into your airplane, bus, however you're getting home. What is the first thing you do? You pull out your phone and you start thinking about your next trip. And so it is a fundamentally different way of thinking about marketing to people because we have, opportunities to tell stories, to engage with people, and, to extend the guest journey. So that's really what makes, tourism marketing that much different, right? Because we're also never not telling stories. Like we have an opportunity to engage and
Mm,
interact with people at every point in the guest journey. And the other thing about tourism that's it's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity is that a huge percentage of the experiences that we have are with small local tourism operators. So we're not talking about large
mm.
conglomerates, consumer packaged goods brands, like big outdoor lifestyle companies. We're talking about somebody who got into tour guiding because they love what they do. So there's so much like passion and enthusiasm in the space, and there's opportunities to tell stories, but there a lot of times there isn't a lot of scale or resources, and so there's an opportunity for people to come together and do things collaboratively.
I'm curious, COVID shut down the world. Do you see a new mindset towards travel post-pandemic? Is there just pent-up demand or people thinking differently?
Yes. I say that with hesitation because the exact answer is a lot. But there's a couple different ways of thinking about that. One is, so I had the luxury of course, working with a lot of brands leading up to COVID and a lot of organizations and destination marketing organizations in provinces and states. And in that period of time, we'll call it the 2016 to sort of 2019 period, one of the biggest challenges was convincing organizations to embrace digital, to like say, well, this is how people are seeking things out. This is how they're booking. This is how they're, having conversations with people about destinations. And so really leaning into that was sort of what we were working really hard on. Then of course we have COVID, and then it's 100% digital, or at least 95% digital. And so people were doing virtual events, their virtual experiences, they were finding ways to extend what they were doing. And in this post-COVID world, what's been somewhat exciting to see is the integration of those two worlds. The fact that they're now coming together and we're starting to appreciate that these online guest experiences can be just as impactful as offline guest experiences. And how do we take the things that we love to do offline and communicate them online? So that's been really exciting. But at the same time, you mentioned demand. The demand is off the charts, right? Like I talk to people out
Right.
in the industry every day, and every single person I've talked to, at least in the last couple of weeks, has told me we can't keep up with demand. Like there is a lineup of people
Mm.
who would love to stay here or go on our tour or do whatever it is that we do, but we can't hire. Right. So what's interesting is I'm getting a lot of inquiries from people saying, cool, we can drive more traffic to our website, or great, we get more bookings, but we need to build our employer brand. Like we need to convince people that this is a place that they really should come and build their careers. And tourism as a career builder is something that's really exciting and I think was underrated in the past.
Mm. Oh, that's fascinating. So you got into a little bit about like, some of the clients that you're working with, that you're training and you're consulting. It's not just like the city level or the big, tourism department kind of a thing. Like what are some more examples of the people that have to think this way, that have to think about, making experiences digital so that they can capture people?
Yeah, and you're right that the way that tourism is structured is its own little universe. When you talk to tourism folks, you can think, "Well, are they speaking English with their RDMOs and RTOs?"
Yeah. And that's what I want you to bring me into, because I'm just realizing as you're talking, I don't understand this universe.
In general, so the way that every province and every state is structured differently, but in general, we have sort of a
Mm,
three-tier way of thinking about it. We have a provincial or statewide organization whose job it is to effectively tell the
mhm.
story of that region to the world. And those have always needed to exist because, like, once upon a time, as tourism organizations, we couldn't buy a billboard in Sydney, Australia, right? Like, we couldn't pay for bus ads in
Right.
Italy to convince people to say, come to our part of the world. So we needed to come together to buy that media. What's interesting is now we all have access to media, right? We can all buy a Facebook ad, we can all buy a Google ad. So
Mm,
that role has diminished to a certain extent. Here in BC, Destination BC still does a fantastic job of telling stories, but they've shifted their role, and a lot of similar organizations have shifted their role much more into a support organization, providing training and infrastructure, helping organizations to manage, leaning into sustainability, to indigenous relations, like all of these ways that they can support these operators that isn't just buying ads. Then we have regional support, which is, we'll call it, tourism Fraser Valley or Okanagan, and they will bring a region together to tell its unique story. And then finally, there's the city level, which of course is a tourism Vancouver, a tourism Seattle, San Francisco. But of course, the really exciting work all happens at the operator level. So in the industry, we call them operators. These are like the actual people who are out in the field, doing work. And if I could give a specific example, I loved a project that we got to do, back in the old days, pre-COVID, where we were working with this very underrated part of the world called Prince Rupert. Now, if you're not from the area, Prince Rupert is call it a fishing town, but that's like underselling it. It's up in northern BC. It's right on the coast. You can actually kind of see Alaska from there, but it's not Alaska. It's still in British Columbia, and it has the best of everything. The best bird watching. There's eagles literally outside your hotel room. It's got whales that are breaching in the harbor. You can see grizzly bears certain times a year. It is incredible,
Oh my
and
gosh.
incredibly friendly, like funny people. And we went up there and they were like, how do we use digital to attract more people to Prince Rupert? And they were very self-aware. And they're like, most people don't even know what's in northern British Columbia, let alone what Prince Rupert was. So they leaned into this idea of not just buying ads and not just like, putting out messaging into the world that, we get people to click and book, but
Hmm.
instead collectively telling the story of what the region is. And so what the campaign was called was Nothing to See Here. And it was this amazing sort of vibe that we noticed in town, which is people were like, yeah, people down south, they don't really know what's going on up here, but that's fine. They'll figure it out sooner or later. And so the campaign was all about, what is this nothing that people are missing? So you'd have, a family out on their front porch taking a photo. Meanwhile, there's eagles and whales in the background. There might be some like world-class craft beer and food. And they're like, yep, nothing to see here. And what we were able to do is
I
get the
love it.
mayor, get ex-Prince Rupert people who now play professional hockey, get people from all over North America posting about the Nothing to See Here up in northern British Columbia. And of course, the impact was it created this real sense of local pride. It allowed people to understand not just like the sights and sounds, but the personality of the place.
Hmm.
And so to your question, I think there's just, when it comes to tourism and it comes to place, there's so much more opportunity to lean into digital than just, here's a deal or here's a room, click here to buy now.
Right. I love that you're helping your clients think of that big picture. The what was the moment where you decided we not only want to work directly with locations, but we want to train, we want to start educating so that these operators can do this well for themselves. Just tell me the story of elearningu.com.
Well, thanks for bringing it up because I mean, obviously, this is eLearning U is something that we've been super passionate about. Really excited about launching new courses and new training. Honestly, it was over COVID. We had been hired by a lot of regions to develop custom training in the pre-COVID days, and we love doing it. Right? It's amazing to be able to dig into a place and like develop digital marketing, social content training. But over COVID, we realized we had all of this amazing content, and everybody needed it because we had a little bit of time, right, to train, to develop our skills. And we thought, why do we just sit on this? So let's start putting it out into the world. So we created, free webinars and sessions, and we just kind of gave it away as much as we could. As a result, Marketing News Canada actually recognized us with their leadership award. But one of the really cool things that happened was we heard about this platform called eLearning U, and I was actually invited on as a guest speaker for a couple of sessions. And I looked around and I was like, this is exactly what the industry needs. This is one place
Mm,
where everybody can come together, get the latest that's happening, get relevant information, get tourism specific training. And it just so
mm.
happened that the founder was looking to graduate to retirement. And so we were able to come
Wow.
together, have a conversation. Junction was able to step in and become an acquirer. And next thing eLearning U is our way of scaling what we love to do, which is, training in the tourism
Right.
industry and make it available to people all over North America.
Because the reality is that a lot of these people couldn't afford to bring you in as the consulting agency. I mean, it just and you couldn't even serve all the people that would need that help. So they're able to get, your insights and experience and training so that they can practice these things and tell these stories themselves.
It works in both ways, right? Because like I love being on the road and leading workshops, but like there's only so many airplanes you can get on and so many like boardrooms you can teach in. And so it allows me to do that. And the
Right.
fact that, every Thursday we do a lesson, and that lesson now goes out to over 3,000 learners blows my mind. Like that is my favorite part of my week. But
Amazing.
also on the other side, we can scale in that like we've brought in speakers from like Pinterest and Google and TripAdvisor. Like we're able to get a scale of guests on our show that I couldn't do for a
Right.
30-person workshop. It just wouldn't make sense. And so on both sides of the equation, it just allows us to do so much
Exactly.
more of what we wanted to do.
Tell me about the type of people that are learners, like the kinds of work they're doing, the operators that you described. Give me just a few examples of the ideal person to benefit from this.
As I mentioned, there's over 3,000 learners. So they're all over North America in every, shape and size and role. But yeah, there are three really specific groups that really seem to be like gravitating and getting a lot of benefit from the platform. One is the operator, right? There's somebody who they have tons of ideas and passion and creativity, but not enough time, not enough resources. And so they want to come and be
Mm,
like, okay, well, what might actually work? And they are also frustrated because
mm,
there's so many resources out there that they don't know exactly which one is like relevant to tourism or what they should be, looking for. So we save them a lot of time by
mhm,
condensing all of those things down into bite-sized chunks. The other is sort of what we call the destination marketer. So there are thousands of sort of
mm.
cities and regions and provinces and states, and there's marketing coordinators and specialists, and those people are really good at what they do, but they typically come up as social media content creators or as email marketers or as
Mm,
SEOs.
mhm.
And what this allows them to do is take a holistic look at tourism marketing and say, all right, well, I get now how social and email work together, or I understand now how conversion rate optimization is an important
Interesting.
part of the funnel in the context of tourism. So but that is a whole separate group of people. Love those
Mm,
folks as well because they come with really good ideas and questions. And then the third, and this has been really exciting, we're starting to get interest from post-secondary institutions. So we're hearing from tourism schools who like teach tourism management and sometimes tourism marketing, and they're like, there's no way that we as a teaching institution can keep up with what's going on. So we're sending these folks off into the world with these like high class educations. They're fantastic at what they do,
mm.
but they want to make sure that these people are like job ready. They want to make sure that they have really specific
That's
and
so
actionable
smart.
tools
Yeah.
that they can use. So people are literally coming out of these 2-year certification programs and going straight into e-learning U, and I love that.
Oh, it's so smart. I mean, yeah, you're right. Like some of these larger institutions, it's so hard to have their hand on the pulse of what's really taking place in the industry. So for them to be able to hand them off to you makes so much sense. Is there is there a particular like shift in thinking that you're pushing your students towards? Like, is there a consistent like think about tourism in this way, think about storytelling in this way that you're, what's the drumbeat of your message to them?
We talked about the shift from like pre-COVID, during the pandemic, all digital, and now post. We've been trying to say the same thing for probably 7 years now, which is that the offline journey is just as important as the online journey, maybe even more so. So there's actually
Mm,
data to back this up now.
mm,
So when we looked at studies that examined just how many touch points and how much time people spend on a trip, we see there's roughly 80 to
mm.
85% of that time is online, right? So for every day that we're spending
Wow.
traveling, we're spending like 5 days planning, researching, watching YouTube videos, blog posts. 80% of the enjoyment or the value we get out of travel is planning, right? Is thinking about anticipating our next trip.
Oh my gosh.
And so I
Wow.
think about this in terms
Wow.
of the 80-20 principle, right? So where does 80% of our energy and our budget and our thinking go?
Mm.
It goes to the physical experience, which by all means, it absolutely like the physical experience is super important. If we don't have that, then
Right.
none of it, nothing, none of the rest of it matters.
Yeah.
But if we separate just the product, like the hotel room, let's say, or like the time on the boat, if you're a fishing tour, and think about just the guest experience, Well, of course, we should be investing in the online guest experience. Like, of course, we should be treating every one of those touch points through digital with the same level of care and respect that we would when somebody walks into our lobby. And so what's exciting is that now people are open to that message.
I've never heard anybody say that you spend that much time, the majority of your time in the planning, and that's where the actual joy is, which actually makes the marketing, I feel like, have so much more meaning. It's like, of course, you want to sell people on the destination and the location and so on. But if you do this well and you make the digital experience really excellent, you're actually contributing to their overall
Oh my
joy
goodness, yes.
in the experience. Like you're improving the lives of these people by making the digital, journey and planning easier, more exciting, more interesting, and so on. And that's just a really kind of a mind blowing way to think about that. I love that.
Well, you know how much more fun it is too when you walk into a team or even an individual who has this mindset when they're thinking about their digital guest experience, and they're thinking, how do I bring delight? How do I bring joy? How do I bring fun into the guest experience? And then you compare and contrast that to
Mm,
somebody who's thinking, how do I maximize every hour and every dollar? How do I put something onto social media that's going to get the maximum number of clicks and internet points or hearts? Right? It
right.
is a
It's so soul sucking to have that kind of mindset. I think it ends up
yes.
coming through on the digital
And
content that's
here's
created.
the really exciting part. When we look at it from value add to the guest experience, everything gets better. Like we get more clicks, we get more
Mm,
efficiency on our ads because the people actually want to see them. We get
right.
more people signing up for our newsletter, right? So it's not an either or thing. And when we lean into guest experience, everything improves.
I've heard you talk about digital from the inside out.
What does
The
that
idea
mean? So there's a bit of a backstory there, but so this is this idea that like organizations are strongest when they embrace this idea of digital from the inside out. And so this was something we realized again
mm,
7-8 years ago when we were working as a client service agency. We were because it was so niche in those days to be online only that we
mm,
had to build websites and do social media campaigns. And we realized when we looked around, we realized well there are brands out there and our own clients included who just click, right? They just get it. They get followers, they get subscribers, they
mm,
get, their websites work, everything works. But the majority of brands out
mhm,
there, it doesn't. Like they can't figure out why they can't get more followers or subscribers. They can't figure out why digital wasn't really working for them. And once we looked at that and we said,
mhm,
what's the difference between these two groups? It became so clear. The group that was clicking had internal capacity. What we mean by that was they had clarity and strategy. They understood where they were going and what they were doing. They didn't necessarily have like an
mm,
internal agency. They didn't necessarily like write their own ads
right.
or shoot their own videos. But when they
Mhm,
were working with contractors or agencies or whoever, they were like, this is where we're going. This is why digital is important. And this is how it integrates into everything else we're
oh,
doing.
wow.
So we're like, oh my goodness. Like if that's the answer, what are we doing over here? Because like we're literally
Mhm,
trying to take billing out of these brands and hand it over to us. Now, I think we were doing a pretty good job, and I love agencies to this day. But if
sure.
we can be a part of the solution, which is to empower organizations to think about digital from the inside out, we make the relationships with agencies stronger, we make the work better, and we make the customer experience
Mm,
better too, because everything is an integrated part of the customer experience. We're like, well, that's what we should do. And so that's when we pivoted to being a consultancy. But the funny part is, and the reason I laughed when you brought it up, we sat there just like everybody else in a boardroom for probably 4 hours. And we're like, how do we like explain this idea? How do we like put our finger on it? We're like, we are a digital consultancy that's empowering brands to take control of and we're like, that's terrible. Right. So we post-it notes all over the room. And we're like at hour 4, we're exhausted, we're ready to pack it in. And my wife walks in the room and she also, at the time worked in social and digital. And she's like, what are y'all talking about? And when she saw the notes, she's like, oh, digital from the inside out. Can we go to dinner now? You got
That's
to be kidding me.
awesome. I mean, it's really so true. Like when I hear you talk about that, what I think about is just authenticity. It's impossible to put a price on that, like the value of it. Internal clarity that comes out in the way you speak, the way your team, communicates about the vision and so on. And if that's not present, you can hire the best agencies, the best content creators in the world, and they'll be trying to just like pull something out of you, right? So I love that. I love that digital from the inside out.
In the beginning, it was selfish, right? Like I was having these Twitter conversations with brands. Because like I was an early Twitter adopter. I think I started my account in like 2009. And come like 2013, 14, Twitter was like the brand thing, right? Brands wanted to be on Twitter. So I'm having these conversations and
Mhm.
like DMing with brands, and they're awesome, right? Like these people have personality and they're fun. I'm
Yeah.
like, great, I'm in, sign me up. And so then I would go to the store and be like, this isn't anything like that experience I just had. And people here don't have any idea
Wow.
about the product or the promotion that we were just talking about. There's a complete disconnect. But then, so I
Mm.
had this idea. I was like, this sounds like a good idea. Of course, like things should be integrated in theory, but it was all very like soft and squishy until we actually started to implement them.
Right.
And it was only, a couple of years later, we did an experiment with a retail brand. It was a, Canadian retailer, 30 locations or so. And we just asked the question, we said, what if we got people who are in store to have one online interaction? Like, what if we somehow found a way to get them to sign up for the newsletter,
Mm.
to engage on social? Like, what if we had one online interaction in addition to the retail experience? And in that experiment, we were
Mm.
able to show that single interaction made that customer 3 times more valuable that year. That customer would spend on average 3 times more. Their customer value in that single year was 3 times greater than it was had they not had any sort of online interactions. We're like, all right, well, there's the data, right? So we have this soft and squishy idea that, of course, we should be telling the same story,
Yeah.
but now we have the hard data that shows like we have a 3x return just by having a single interaction. What if we really leaned into that? And that was, sort of the spark that everything else grew from.
That's incredible. So give me an example of the single interaction that has that 3 times increase?
Sure, we've all had this retail experience where you go to a large, we'll call it a quick fashion experience, and just like we go to
Yeah.
a website and a pop up shows up, and we're like, this is a terrible experience. Why would anybody do it? They know that quantifiably
Mm.
that drives more value. Well, when you go to a register and somebody asks for your email address, you're like,
Mhm.
this is a bad experience. I don't like this. It's not fun. But they know quantifiably that drives more value. So the question for us, if we're not one of these national retailers who's like stuck in a training program where
Mhm.
people aren't really thinking about joy and fun and wanting to build that
Yeah.
relationship, how do we have that same interaction but make it fun, right? And how do we make it something that people
Right.
actually appreciate? And I mean, easy and
Mm.
obvious example is just like signage in the lobby, or like Instagrammable moments. When we can create something that people want to share online
Right.
that
Yeah.
satisfies not only
Mhm.
their online engagement with us, but it creates word of mouth. It creates a deepened relationship. So it's about like finding those offline experiences and making them, inherently shareable.
That's so good. I'm curious how you consult clients in the tourism industry to think about social media platforms. Which one to focus on, be present on all of them. How does an organization think through that question?
It's an important question, but I think a lot of the times it's the wrong one. And what I mean by that is we're also focused on how do we make our Facebook better, right? Or how do I get more Instagram, followers or likes or whatever? But really, at the end of the day, like, who cares? And like, of course, we care, right? Like, we want
Mm,
our programs to be successful. But if we take a step back and go, like, why are we using these tools in the first place, and what is the thing that we're trying to create?
yeah.
It sounds like maybe academic, but what it really allows us to do is go like, well, what makes us the best in the world at what we do? Why do people love us? And like, how do we do that at
Mm,
scale? And sometimes what we'll find is when we really dig in, scale might only be hundreds, not millions. And I'll give an example. I was working with
interesting.
a tour company, they're high end tour company, and they're operating into the center of the continent. And their bookings are worth 15, 20, 25,000 every time they book somebody.
Mm,
And they only have 12 spots per year that aren't booked. And so they're out there trying to create YouTube videos that get millions of followers and millions of views, which is great. But I asked the question, like, so what? And what if we focus, instead of those million
right.
people, what if we focus on a couple hundred? And effectively what we did is we created this amazing community of people who love what they do. And again, this was a fishing destination. People who love what they do, they wanted to
Mm.
stay in touch all year round, and they made it really, really easy for them to refer their friends and bring more people in. They have a 3-year waiting list now. Like, and literally all they did is shifted their resources from thinking about a million viewers to thinking about how do we get a couple hundred more people to invite a couple hundred more people. So I don't mean to say that Instagram isn't important. Of course it is. For a lot of us it is, but sometimes it's about, are we asking the right question and what are these tools good for?
Mhm. That's so good. Yeah, I think a lot of the small business owners that listen to this podcast, the the metric is just big, blow up on TikTok or have a huge Instagram following and so on. And actually thinking about the specifics of their ideal customer does end up being a much smaller pool. What are some of the ways to think about reaching a smaller group of people? I mean, I feel like, social media gives you the promise or maybe the illusion that you can reach millions. So that just seems like obvious. Well, just go for the millions. But how do you start to think about, reaching the 100 people that will be interested in that high end, fishing destination versus the millions that are out there?
Yeah, I think that, and not in that specific case, but in general, I look across tourism and even across like small retail, and I think that email is the most underrated tool by far, not even close. I'm super
Mm,
biased because I write a newsletter every week and I love it. We've been doing it now for about 5 years. But the reason we do it is we go like it's the most direct and personal connection we have to people. We're showing up literally in people's inboxes every week. I can segment. I know what people are responding to. I
mm,
know what they care about. I can use it to test ideas or different topics. And so
mm,
when we think about relationships with a couple hundred or a couple thousand people, like we have guests who have stayed with us. We know that there are a certain number of people, whether it's 10 or 10,000, who want to hear from
yeah.
us. How do we, add value? And this is the sort of the little secret in the industry is that, and I say this with respect, and I tell this to my clients too, everybody sucks at it. Like, think about the emails that you get from brands. And I mean, this is like national brands. These are like global organizations. Because we're so focused on here is, stay 2 nights, get the third night free. Or we're so focused on this season, we're adding this product or service. We
Mm,
forget that like people love tourism, right? They want to see what we're up to. They want
yeah.
to hear the stories from the field,
Mm,
hear like what chef is doing, what the tour guides are seeing. Like they will open those emails and they will build a relationship on a small scale, as we say early on, but that grows if we just tell them stories and give them the kind of content they want. So I know it's a very specific recommendation, but like I haven't yet
no,
seen, and
that's
I've
good.
had the chance now to work with thousands of organizations. I haven't yet seen a tourism company when I'm like, yep, they're nailing email. They're getting all the value they can get out of email. If it exists, I don't know about it.
So maybe not the sexiest, hottest thing, but like double down and work on your emails, and so much good could come from that.
Here's a really easy one, right? And I think this applies to everybody, but especially tourism. We have this amazing experience, right? We come in, we interact with these people who love what they do, then we go and leave. And so, as I say, we're always travelers, right? We think about our next trip, and we get back into that same
Mm.
place that I was describing before. We're on the airplane, we're in the bus, and what happens? We open our phone, we get an email from the place we just stayed at or the tour that we were just on, and it says, "Hey, customer XYZ123, here's your automated receipt." I'm like, that is the moment where I'm most excited. I just did the thing that you want me to do, right? I just had this amazing experience, and I
Yeah.
probably am, like,
Yeah.
open to telling the world about it. I will write you a review, I will give you feedback, I'll take a survey, I will post wherever it is that I post, but instead we send them an automated, verification that we don't really care about them, even though we know that we do. But because we don't think about
Right.
digital as a part of the guest experience, we let people know that you're gone now. This is the customer service experience is over.
We got your money and,
Yeah.
we don't care about you anymore. But it's such a key moment for them passing along, like, the excitement they have. So it's so true. Those digital moments just reinforce or deaden potentially the enthusiasm.
And the question very often is that, like, how do I get more Google reviews or how do I get more user generated content on Instagram? And it's like, how do we make people feel valued? How do we make people feel like we appreciate?
Yeah.
And a lot of
Yeah.
times they because we're talking about small businesses, right? Or we're talking about people who are passionate about what they do. People want to support us. And so if we just tell them
Mm.
that this is something important to our business, something, this is a way that they can support us just with a simple, a couple of clicks and, some words on the internet, they'll do it.
This podcast is sponsored by the creative agency Clear and Loud. Whatever your business's product, service, or idea, we believe clarity changes everything. We help you clarify your strategy, your brand messaging, and your online content so that you reach the right audience and grow your business. If you're frustrated by an ineffective website, if your message is jumbled and confusing, and you're not getting the traction you want with your marketing, let's talk. Schedule a free 30-minute consultation by visiting clearandloud.com. Well, we both live in Vancouver, BC, in Canada, and I was down in Nashville. I went down to Nashville for a trip, and I was blown away by the way that that city has turned itself into this incredible, travel destination for music. It's like the capital of bachelorette parties, I think, in America. Um, a very American, they, call it Nash Vegas kind of a thing. But as I was on Lower Broadway, um, I was thinking, why can't we have something amazing like this in Vancouver? I was just curious, like how does this? Why is it that certain cities are so good at that? Or how does a city do that? Does that have to be at the city level? How do that kind of vibrancy sort of bubble up? Because I was talking to somebody who lived there, and they're like, "Oh yeah, 10 years ago, this was a trashy area. Nobody really came here. It didn't have that kind of tourist magnetism that it does." So I'm just curious, how does that kind of turnaround take place?
I love the question. And the timing is amazing. So we actually just did a research project, Junction did in our consulting capacity with a city that really wants to become a music destination. So they asked us the question, how do we do
Oh,
this?
wow.
We did
We
not
did not
plan this.
plan
This
this
is totally,
question, folks. This was
and
not
so
a
the findings
setup.
from our research will actually be published publicly in a couple of months. So watch for it. Um, and I can tell you
Oh,
specific to
amazing.
Nashville, we looked at Nashville, we looked at Austin, and we looked at, of all places, Indianapolis. And because Indianapolis,
Mm.
most people don't know, is actually a music destination and pays better than any other city in America compared to the cost of living.
Oh, wow.
But you asked about Nashville.
Incredible.
It's what's really interesting about Nashville is we found there were a couple of different principles that were necessary in order for it to become what it is. One was history, right? So Nashville has it
Mm.
was just another American town, right? It didn't have anything special about
Mm.
it except that it was at the turn of the century, turn of the 19th, 20th century, there was this group of musicians that where the university sent on like an international tour to go and play in all of these different markets. And as it was sort of like an American outreach, American cultural tour. Um, but what ended up
Right.
happening was everyone was like, "What is this amazing music?" And they were hearing, American blues and jazz for the first time ever. Right? Nobody had ever heard this before. And people were like, "What is this amazing music? Where are you from?" And they're like, "Well, we're from Nashville." It just so happened that they were from Tennessee, right? There wasn't anything special about Nashville at the time, but it created this global brand where people are like, "Great American music comes from Nashville." And so we fast forward a little bit, there was more investment into the academic programs. The Grand Ole Opry was started off as a show, and then they built a stage. They created infrastructure, and then the culture started to build around that because they had this name, they had this reputation, but they also had the infrastructure. So then investment showed up, and then the city got behind it. And what happens is now we have all of these amazing stories from the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. Anybody who's anybody in country music, in blues, or in jazz has come through or come from Nashville. And we get to, as you say, in sort of the 90s, the 2000s, it wasn't the Nashville that it is today, but it was the hub for legitimate musicians. It was where recording happened. It was where, studio sessions happened. Like the best studio musicians in the world live in Nashville. And then, the tourism industry went, let's lean into this. Let's really use this as, an attraction. And Nashville has become sort of a complicated case study at this point too, right? Because now we have, as you say, it's become the bachelorette, capital of the world. And there's this like conflict where it's like is great for the industry. It brings lots of money in, but are we sort of like creating a Disneyland of the culture? Like, are we like overrunning what made it special in the first place? And I don't have an answer for that. We that question comes up in a lots of different. It came up in Iceland recently. It's come up in Fiji. It certainly has come up in Hawaii. Like, how do we respect the people who have been there for hundreds or thousands of years and also be good to the industry? And so it's something we constantly think about. But in Nashville, it is, I'm glad you brought it up because it's a fascinating case study and there's all kinds of different ways to think about Nashville, but it certainly is proof that one, the story has to be authentic. We can't make it up, right? In their case, it was hundreds of years old. But once we have that really amazing and authentic story, we can impact it, right? We don't just have to leave it to chance. We can actually lean into that, tell that story, and maybe in the case of Nashville, have too much of a good thing.
Before we wrap up, your email newsletter that you mentioned, where can people get that and get you in their inbox?
Probably aside from the show that we do every Thursday, the most fun part of my week. It's been doing it for like 5 or 6 years. It's literally just me and the team and other voices coming in talking about things that are happening in digital. Like, the idea has always been to equip people for the week. And so they can sign up at brief.wearejunction.com, brief.wearejunction.com. And you can also see we recently started putting on the most recent issue. So if you want to just take a look, you can click there. But we never sell anything. We never sell the list. It's literally just our opportunity to talk about the things that we're really excited about.
Fantastic. Well, we'll definitely put that in the show notes for the podcast. But Conner, thanks for being so generous with your knowledge. You've made me want to do more travel, and I hope people who are wanting to be storytellers and tell the story of their local areas and promote tourism will sign up for more opportunities to learn from you. elearningu.com just sounds incredible.
Appreciate it, Josh. And if I had one prompt for the listeners, like those of you who don't work in the tourism industry, we're all travelers. The next time you're going on a trip, check out, and this is not a plug for any of my clients, but check out the DMO, the Destination Marketing Organization website, because chances are it's got some amazing local gems that you're not going to find at the top of TripAdvisor. And what they're actively trying to do is tell the story of people who are super passionate about what they do and these amazing little operators or destinations. So whether it's visitatlanta.com or hellobc.com or whatever that happens to be, the resources are super underrated. And I think that they're a great way to plan out your travel.
Oh, I love that tip. That's fantastic. I'm going to do that for my next trip. Thanks for listening to the Clear and Loud podcast. I'm your host, Josh Harris. Our producer is Pam Cameron, and this episode contains music by Jeremy Yaddo at Music for Podcasts. If you like what you hear, give us a boost by subscribing or leaving a review on Spotify or Apple or wherever you listen. We'd also love your feedback on today's episode. Or if you have a question you'd like addressed on a future episode or a guest you'd like us to consider, email us at hello@clearandloud.com. You can also shoot us a direct message on Instagram. Our handle is @clearandloud. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.